And welcome, students. Today we get to talk about malware and other security threats. So we finally get to dive our teeth into one of the larger topics, and we start talking about data and stuff like that. Because we talked about some stuff with privacy and stuff like that for concerns, but this is probably one of the larger issues at hand in terms of some of the more malicious things that go out there. So let's get started here. There are many types of malicious software, exploits, and network attacks, and much more that pose a danger to both you, well, your computer, I should say, and your data. And when we talk about your data, it could be like your login information, your banking information, your identity, all that different pieces. Now, in this lesson, we're going to examine some of the more common types of attacks. And there's going to be quite a few of them. This is not every type of attack, and we're not going to drill down into every different piece of them. We're just going to kind of talk about the more common ones. Well, and later on, we'll examine some strategies for protecting and preventing some of these attacks in the upcoming labs. Because we're not going to do it all here in the notes because, well, the thing is with all these strategies, they tend to change, things evolve. So we're not going to put it right in the notes. Instead, we're going to give some of that information later on in labs, and you'll go to find it yourself. So let's start off first talking about software bugs. A bug is a software error flaw that causes software to behave in unexpected or unusual ways. Now, the term for bug was actually coined in 1946 by Admiral Grace Hopper when they discovered an actual moth stuck in the wires of a computer. Pretty much the computer was wondering, like, okay, what's the problem with it? I'll go there, oh, there's a moth in the wires. And when she was asked about the progress of the machine, her reply was, I don't know, they're still getting the bugs out, leading to our term that we have today. All right, now, bug is, of course, usually some kind of error, as I mentioned, and a lot of times these bugs will, outside of causing the software to crash and stuff like that, can also lead to exploits that can be used by malicious attackers. Now, debugging is the process of removing said bugs from programs, which costs at least $60 billion annually of the U.S. economy. So there's quite a bit of money going out to fix all these errors. All right, so let's jump into malware, which is malicious software. Malware is used to interrupt computer operations, gather sensitive information, or gain private computer access. Typically one of those three things. It's not everything, obviously, but typically one of those. Malware has many varying forms, and there are even some that are used by legitimate companies to gather analytical data, such as like tracking cookies, even some forms, which is a form of adware or spyware. Some of these things are legitimate, but they're not always that friendly. Now, let's go ahead and examine a few of the more common types of malware. Starting off with the virus, probably one of the most well-known types of malware. Right? A virus is a piece of malware that attaches itself to another file program, and this is what's very distinct about a virus from some of the other ones. A virus has to be attached to something. So if you, let's say, download a piece of software, there will be an additional piece of software attached. It might look like it's all part of it, but it's attached to the software as a file or something like that, and that is the virus itself. All right, it's not a self-contained program. Viruses are usually attached to an executable file and can spread uncontrollably. Once they start running, they're off. It's like the shot has gone off, and they're running down that racetrack. All right. A lot of times, they'll damage a system's core functionality and even delete or corrupt files on your computer. Viruses spread when the executable files run, allowing it to affect other computers. If you're connected on a network, a lot of times the viruses will attempt to spread over the network. Now, there are numerous ways this can occur, such as through email and also text message attachments, internet file downloads, so downloading things off the internet, social media scam links, so if something gets shared out in social media and it looks like a URL, be careful when you go to click on it because it could, of course, be something malicious. And, of course, shady app downloads. This is particularly true. Let's say you're on Android and you just go ahead and just get the APK file rather than downloading it directly from the store. That could also be a way of getting it there. Now, viruses can hide disguised as attachments of socially shareable content. So it's important to use caution and never download text or email attachments that you're not expecting or files from websites you don't trust. Even if the sender looks like someone you might know, remember a lot of times they will pose as someone that you might know, whether it's like your bank or maybe even a family or friend. So just a good general rule of thumb is if you get a link sent to you ask, what is this link for? Because a lot of times, if it is a legitimate link from, let's say, a family or friend member, like, oh, this is just a picture that I took of the kids or something like that. You know, don't click on a link just because it's from someone you know. Because sometimes, yes, what's if their phone was compromised, you don't know that, and now they send you a malicious link, and now your phone is compromised as well. So keep that in mind. All right, that being said, let's move to the next one, which is worms. Much like a virus, worms can also infect computers across networks. However, unlike a virus, they can travel without any human interaction. Virus waits for you to run the executable file. Worms, not so much. As I just mentioned, they have to wait for the user to run the executable before it can spread. Worms typically spread by exploiting security holes in software. All right, so this goes back to the whole software bug issue. Worms love software bugs because they can exploit it. And if it's a very common piece of software, so let's say one of the most infamous ones, Adobe Flash, they can spread like wildfire across of it. Now, once your machine is infected, the worm can corrupt files, it can steal sensitive information, it can even install a backdoor, giving cyber criminals access to your computer, or even modify system settings. So worms can do a lot of damage pretty quickly. Using software firewalls to block unauthorized traffic to and from your computer can help prevent the chance of your computer getting infected. Again, firewalls are a great way because it's pretty much port monitoring. If you say, hey, I don't want incoming traffic off of this port, then you can't come in. And a lot of times, worms look for some of those open network ports in order to come into your computer. All right, let's discuss next a rootkit. A rootkit is a type of software that allows control over a computer system without the computer user knowing. Difficult to detect due to the fact that the software is intended to evade any software that's intended to find it. I mean, obviously all malware is like that, but rootkits especially are designed to dig deep into your computer system, so they're not easy to find. Whereas like a virus, it might be just looks like a system file inside of some program folder. This is the kind of stuff that digs down deep into like your system registry. Now, because of its undetectable nature, the software can execute files, change system configurations, access log files, and monitor activity in order to spy on the user. There's really not an easy way to detect and remove rootkits. Now, if you do suspect that your computer may be compromised by a rootkit, the easiest way to get rid of one is to do a complete wipe of your system. Just reinstall the operating system. Wipe everything, get rid of all your system files, reinstall. Boom, you're good to go. All right, next, let's talk about keyloggers. A keylogger, or keystroke logging, is a hardware device or software program that records the real-time activity of a computer user, including the keyboard keys. Now, while there are legitimate uses for keyloggers, believe it or not, malicious usage of the software is used to steal things such as passwords and credit card information. Because when you type that character on a keystroke, it sends right back as that keystroke. So if you hit an L, it's going to send an L. If you hit an A, it's going to send an A. And the keystroke logger can record that. The malware usually is difficult to detect by installing itself in hidden directories or disguising or hiding the application from the operating system. So the operating system doesn't even necessarily know that this process is running. Now, there's numerous techniques, and there's also keystroke encryption software that exists that can be effective at combating keystroke logging. So you can actually get software that you can run. So when you press the L, if the keylogger tries to look at it, it's not going to see an L. It's going to see pretty much gibberish. It's not going to know what was pressed because it's been encrypted. All right, let's talk about browser hacking. This is a type of malware that exists to modify internet browser settings without the user's knowledge or consent. I've actually seen quite a few of these in my days of IT, where people are like, well, I don't know how this got here. All right. Well, the most common way you know that this browser hacking has gone on because it involves changing the home page in the default search settings. You know, like those malicious toolbars. So it's like, hey, all of a sudden I got this like toolbar that shows up. I don't know what it's from. It's probably from something you installed or clicked on. All right. Browser hacking also tend to inject advertisements, automatically redirecting users to potentially malicious destinations when they visit certain sites, and they may also contain keyloggers. Most common form of infection comes in the form of toolbars, as I just mentioned, that are bundled with free software. So remember we talked about things like shareware, and we talked about toolbars. Hey, guess what? There it is. Shareware, any kind of trialware. Boom. It's like, hey, you went click, 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 and now you installed like 3 different kinds of software. And by the way, one of them is a browser hijacker. It just changed your web page settings. Fortunately, remediation of these kind of malware is fairly easy to do, as you can just run your antivirus or anti-malware software that can automatically delete all the associated files with that program, and also using any modifications to your registry. Now, for variants that simply just affected browser settings, like I just changed your home page, didn't really do anything to your computer. Well, that's pretty easy. The user can just reset. They can go on the solve toolbar, boom, change back the home page, boom, life is good. All right, next up, let's talk about rogue security software. This type of malware is a counterfeit software program that appears to be beneficial from a security perspective, but actually instead generates erroneous or misleading alerts to scare you to partake in fraudulent transactions. So this would be, for example, it might pose as a antivirus program, and it says like, your computer's infected, download this program. And so you go download this program, and it's like, beginning scan, we've detected 200 infections on your PC, blah, 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 click here to do this and this and this, and yeah, that's how they get you. It's rogue security software right there. The goal of the software is to trick you into thinking your computer is infected, when it's not. And then cons you into installing or purchasing fake security software. Like it might be an ad that says like, your computer's infected, download now. Please don't do that. Please don't download that. The malware spreads usually from tricking the user into downloading either from things like advertisements, spam, or even manipulate SEO rankings. Right, so you gotta be very careful here. This is another reason why I love things like ad blockers, because they kind of cut out some of the stuff that you would otherwise have to see. All right, let's talk about phishing. Now, phishing, while not a direct form of malware, is still a security risk, as it is an attempt to trick people over an email, text message, phone calls, or fake website with the goal to have the victim typically exchange money, hand over sensitive information, so partaking in identity theft, or downloading malware. The most common form of phishing involves tricking the user to hand over username and password, because then once they have username and password, a lot of times people share usernames and passwords across multiple sites. If I can get into, let's say, this site, now I can get into their banking site, and I can get into their social media site, and yada, yada, yada. Right. This is either done by either linking a fake version to a site that you trust, or by asking you to log in and request that you send it over email. The easiest way to reduce the chance of a phishing attack is to keep alert checking things like spelling, grammar. So that would be, like, for example, if I went to google.com and instead I typed goggle.com, obviously that's not the same. Now I believe it's cleaned up, but it used to be if you type goggle.com, it redirected to a malicious site. So just kind of keep that in mind. Checking the validity of the return address, make sure that if you typed in google.com that you are actually at google.com. Or if it's like an email link, make sure that if you hover over the link, look at where it might say, click here to go to bankofamerica.com. But if you hover over and it's leading to some site that's not bankofamerica.com, maybe you shouldn't click on it. Use anti-spam filters. This particularly applies to email. Make sure you have anti-spam filters on, because remember, a good majority of email traffic is nothing but spam. And also use a good antivirus program, which of course cannot be stressed enough because it helps with so many of these issues. All right, next let's get into spyware. Spyware is another form of malware that functions kind of like its namesake. Secretly monitors your activities in the computer. And it's typically classified into one of four types. System monitors, which are just there to monitor your system settings, performance, hardware. Trojans, which we'll talk about later. Adware, which is on the next slide. And tracking cookies, which are most often just used by websites for things such as login, passwords, different things like that, so you don't have to constantly refresh everything every time you go to the site. Browsing history, stuff like that. While the earliest forms of spyware merely reported on user activity, modern spyware's goal tends to swing more towards stealing confidential information, such as usernames and passwords, for things such as banking sites, email, social networking sites like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., and even online games. Because again, if I can get your username and password for one site, there's a good chance I could get into other sites. And there's a good chance that, like, hey, I might be able to find your credit card information then. That sort of thing. Now, the easy way to keep spyware from spreading is to not download it, as more established, reputable sites aren't keen to spyware. If you go, this is very prevalent for things such as, if we're talking about shareware, remember we just talked about that a moment ago, and you get all our software in there, even though, yes, there might be some browser hijacking stuff that might be in there, some of these more reputable sites are like, no, you're not going to do that. It's going to be just our software, not going to be anybody else's, because we don't want to put our reputation at stake because of a piece of malicious software. Also, make sure you install an anti-spyware tool that will regularly download updates and run in the background without slowing down your computer. Whether this is part of your antivirus program or not, please make sure that you're checking for this. Because remember, antivirus programs typically check for one type of malware. If you have something more like a security suite or center, whatever they call it, it's typically more comprehensive and will check not just for viruses, but will check for things such as spyware. All right, let's talk about adware, which is advertising supported software. And a lot of times adware is legitimate because it's advertising. This is software that typically manifests in the form of unwanted ads, such as pop-ups or on a toolbar, maybe a sidebar, any place on the page. Unfortunately, most adware, while it's annoying, is relatively safe. For example, like typically you have ads on YouTube and they're not going to be malicious. They're annoying as all get up, but they're safe. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't malicious ads. Ads particularly that were built using maybe like Adobe Flash are particularly vulnerable to malicious things. There's these things called drive-by downloads, where advertising, you don't even have to click on the ad. You simply just have to visit the web page, have that load, and then boom, there's the malicious software running on your computer. All right. As I mentioned, some adware is much more malicious and can do things like collect your personal information, track websites that you visit, or even record your keystrokes. Now, adware is usually spread from free software or can come from security holes in your browser, so that's what I talk about with the drive-by downloads, or even your operating system itself. Now, unfortunately, most adware can be removed fairly easily using an adware removal tool to scan for and remove any adware that might be hiding on your device. Another good way to help with adware is to do things like have a ad blocker, because that's going to, when you go to that website, it's going to help keep the ads from popping up on your web page. So obviously there's a couple different options of how to combat adware. Now let's get to Trojans, which is I said that we're going to get to. These are malware that appears to be legitimate, but in reality does something malicious, often granting remote or secret access to your system. These backdoors that it creates are often invisible. Like, you don't know that your computer's been compromised. You have no idea. That's part of the reason why it's a Trojan. All right, let's do a quick comparison here, real quick, of a Trojan to a virus. All right, because a lot of times there is a lot of comparison back and forth between the two of them. Besides just the obvious difference between the two, if you run your antivirus program or anti-malware program, if it detects a virus, the appropriate action should be just to clean the file. Because remember, with a virus, it's attached to the program. So you can remove the virus and keep the program, as it's not going to do any harm, because you just want to remove the one file that's causing the issue. Conversely, though, if you detect a worm or even a Trojan, remember, those are standalone programs, or they're baked into whatever you got. There's no legitimate file. All right, the whole thing is compromised, and the action should be delete the file, remove the program, whatever it is, purge that out of there, because all you're doing is you're leaving yourself a huge vulnerability risk. Now, the real danger of Trojans is the ability to enable other forms of security risk, such as creating backdoors, as I already mentioned, using the computer as a slave in a DDoS attack, or even installing keyloggers. So Trojans, a lot of times themselves, yes, they can do data collection, they can be malicious and stuff like that, but a lot of times they're a stepping stone for other forms of attacks. Now, to remove Trojans, fortunately, most antivirus programs can find and remove Trojans, because they're not necessarily designed to be in that deep. Because again, stepping stone. All right, let's get into some more scary ones, if you will. Let's talk about scareware. This malware's goal is to trick or frighten people into purchasing and installing it. They use things like social engineering to cause the user shock, anxiety, or the perception of a threat. A common tactic involves frightening screens of your computer being infected and their software being required to remove it. Now, scareware targets victims either by trying to get access to their credit cards, engage in identity theft, usually by things like keylogging, or zombifying your computer. And we'll talk about zombifying your computer in a minute here. Now, scareware, fortunately, there are some ways to prevent it. Only use legitimate products. Read emails and plain text instead of HTML because then you can't click on hyperlinks and stuff like that. Never open email attachments from unknown senders. If you don't recognize the sender, don't open the attachment because sometimes those attachments, it's like, oh, look, they sent me a PDF. But sometimes it might look like a PDF, but it might be ending in actually an exe file. So you don't want to click that because it's very likely malicious. Be skeptical of online offers and use Alt F4 to immediately exit. So if you ever go to a site and there's something popping up on your screen or anything like that, don't click on anything. Instead, just use Alt F4 and back out of there. All right, now let's get into some network-based attacks. Not all threats to your computer are from software bugs and malware. We've looked at quite a few of these. However, network-based attacks are a very real threat, and it's very important that you know about a couple of these because we're all using networks, whether it's a wireless network, it's a wired network, cellular network, whatever. From spreading malware to collecting user data to attacking other networks, these threats are becoming more and more common due to a wide potential range of targets. Like if you can compromise a network, you can get a ton of data really quickly. And in this day and age, data is a lot more valuable and a lot more potentially damaging than shutting down a bunch of computers that are running like a version of Windows. Data is all what it's about. All right, so let's get into the first type here. Apparently I missed a type here, which is ransomware. This is a type of malware that is take over your computer and accessible will threaten you with harm, typically by denying you access to your data and demand a ransom in order to restore access to the data upon payment. One of the most common ways that ransomware spreads is via a phishing scam that will come to the victim in email masquerading as a file. It's kind of not really out of place, even though malware is, ransomware, is a type of malware. A lot of times malware is perpetuated, or ransomware, is perpetuated via network attacks or network distribution. A lot of times these will happen to be false claims. That is the most common manifestation that you'll see. That'll be like logic, like the FBI. It says that your computer has been locked up because we've detected pornography or pirated software on your computer. No, it's not true. All right, so that actually needs to go before the network attacks. So just kind of draw a big arrow there. All right, then let's go ahead and jump right to botnets. All right, so this is the first type of network attacks. Botnets are a network comprised of remote-controlled computers, or bots, that have been infected with malware. And one of the games has probably experienced bots. What happens is the bot will contact a remote server or other bots for instructions from whoever is controlling the botnet. The most common use for botnets is to broadcast email spam, including phishing scams and denial of service attacks. Security vulnerabilities such as running out-of-date software, using the Java browser plugin, or downloading or running pirated software may potentially infect your machine. So make sure you keep stuff up to date. It's easy enough to do. All right. The next type is zombie computers, which I had already mentioned here. If you don't know what a zombie computer is, it doesn't mean that your computer has become undead. It just means your machine has been compromised, and there's a very big possibility then that it is a zombie. A zombie will often carry out criminal actions without their owners detecting any user activity. This is part of the reason why we call it a zombie, because it's acting on its own volition. It's not in your control. Zombies help from the previously mentioned botnets. The botnets, like a lot of times, guess what they're doing? They're using zombies. Trojans set up zombies. So beware of the zombies. They're coming for you. If your machine has been infected, most often the solution to remove the zombie status is to completely erase the hard drive and reinstall the operating system. Pretty much purge everything out there, because you're not going to be able to get it back until you do that. Additionally, over time, one of the more telltale signs is that zombies will accumulate so much malware because they're just a big, huge vulnerability just running. They will become unusable by their owners anyways. There'll be so much malware just like popping up and stuff like that. It's like, at that point, just reinstall the operating system, get a new computer. Because, again, the zombies, they're going to get you. Alright, now zombies can contribute to DDoS attacks. Right. Most commonly, though, these are via botnets. DDoS, or the distributed denial of service attacks, occurs when attackers attempt to make it impossible for a service to be delivered, such as things like accessing a server, accessing network services, accessing the network themselves. These malicious attacks focus on drowning a system with requests for data, such as hitting a web server with so many requests that it crashes on demand, or a database being hit with a high volume of queries. And these aren't like anything malicious necessarily. These are legitimate queries, but because they're legitimate and they hit it so much, the server, for example, can't process them fast enough, and it pretty much just shuts down. Now, quick note: if you ever hear a denial of service attack, that means that it was one device sending out the malicious data request. If you hear a distributed denial of service attack, or DDoS, that's come from multiple devices. Typically, it's a botnet that's sending out all these requests at once. Now, it can be difficult, if not impossible, to stop a DDoS attack once it's started. Since DDoS attacks largely use botnets, you can use preventative techniques against botnets to keep your machines from preventing in such attacks. Alright, last one, let's just talk about man-in-the-middle replay attacks. These are pretty similar. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and just call them man-in-the-middle attacks. These are attacks that intercept legitimate communication and forge a fictitious response to the sender. The active attacks intercept and alter content before they are sent back to the user. So they'll take the information, alter it, send it off. Where the passive one simply just looks at the information, records it, and then sends it back to the original recipient without them knowing that their information has been detected. Now, a lot of times these attacks will occur over public Wi-Fi, as those access points typically have poor to no security and encryption options. So if you're out like on a public Wi-Fi network, you're just browsing, maybe not as big a deal. But if you're out and let's say wanting to do like your banking information, and you're sitting at like a Starbucks and you're connected to their public Wi-Fi, you may want to hold off on doing that, because if you do that, your information's free floating out on the internet. Because a lot of times those public ones, you have some guy sitting in the parking lot just waiting to see who's going to connect to an open access point. Oh, look, here's Johnny, and he's doing his banking information. I can just pull that information right on down, and now I have all of it. So very scary thing, but again, one of those things that you kind of need to know about. All right, seems like a lot of information to kind of throw at you here, but we're going to go ahead and call it our wrap for today. So until the next time.